guess. What year did you say that was?
This is a 1949 L7 Gibson.
Oh, okay.
And I think Chet's was a 47 L7. 47 or 48. I think he's a 47. I don't know for sure. So, you know, this is in that same era as his guitar would be. And, you know, he bought an acoustic L7 and he electrified it himself. You know, he bought a P90 Gibson pickup and sawed a hole in it, installed it, and then he saved up some money, and when he could afford a second pickup, he bought a second pickup and cut another hole and electrified it himself with the Carter sisters and Mother Maybelle. And that's what he was playing back then, was that L7 in 48, 49, right before he got his D'Angelico. And he also had the Vibrola on the L7. I don't know if I've ever seen a picture of the L7 with the Vibrola on it. I think there's one photo I've seen that him with the Carter sisters, and you can see the handle sticking out here. So he had that, he said, on every guitar he owned back then. And so, yeah, that'd make another nice little Chet project here, is to electrify this L7 in the same way that he did his, and also add a Vibrola on the old Rickenbacker Kaufman. And you know, this guitar it's just beat and dinged up just enough to where I don't feel too guilty about cutting holes in it. Now, I've seen others and looked at others around that were just too nice of a guitar, you know, to do that to. And this one here has been really used, and although it's still structurally sound, there's no cracks or nothing coming loose or pulling loose or anything like that. So it's structurally, it's still a very good guitar, and nice straight neck. But it's had a little bit of wear on it, and someone somewhere along the way had signed their name in it here. And that's in the finish. It's not all the way to the wood. At least I can't see any sign that it's made it to the wood, so I think Gene can probably sand that down or buff it down with some buffing compound and probably get a lot of that out, or maybe the whole thing. And that won't, you know, if I'm talking about cutting holes in the top, then that's not really of a lot of consequence there, fixing that little thing. Not when you're cutting holes in it anyway. But you know, regardless of all the dings and wear and tear on it, it still plays like an old Gibson. A really nice sound, you know. Let's see. good you can see this. But it is a pretty fair guitar, and so I think it'll make a pretty decent Chet recreation of that old 40s era sound that he had. And so this will be my project for 2022, the coming months, is to electrify this old box. And
Do you know what kind of pickups he used?
yeah, they were Gibson P90s, single coil, and just what you would buy then, you know, their standard sales item. There wasn't any fancy winding or anything going on, because I don't think at that time he knew anything about doing that. And I think he mentioned that in a book, that he bought them, you know, I guess from a music dealer as he got the money. And so you'd buy a pickup in a pot, you know, and then you'd buy another pickup in another pot. And I've seen a photo of that where he had one pickup, you know, and then a later photo where he had two. So, you know, he had to work and save up a little more money to buy the second pickup, you know. And I think he did that on his the Angelico later on, around 1950, 51. Because you see photos of that guitar, and he electrified it also. You know, it's I think I've never seen one with just one pickup. I think he always had the two pickups on that one, but I've seen photos that he did not have the switch installed. So, you know, there was some time between the start and the finish. And, you know, it's kind of amazing how he did all of that stuff, you know, on his own back then, when there wasn't really that many people around doing it, you know, outside of Gibson or somebody like that. Paul Bigsby, Leo Fender, Les Paul. And, you know, it took me about 3 years to do that. And can you imagine playing the guitar every day for a living, and then working on it at night, or I guess at night or weekends, upgrading it? Something else. And so I guess it took him a matter of months to do his Gibson, you know, between the first pickup and the second pickup. And I imagine the vibrola was on it from the beginning, because he mentioned that he would put that on every guitar that he was playing. And if you go through the lineage, that would be like the Martin, and then the L10, and then the L7, and then the Angelico, and then that very first Gretsch that he played before they had his 6120. I think it was a Streamliner Special. That very first one, he got the vibrola on it. That was before the Bigsby. And Gretsch makes a pretty fairly accurate reproduction of that 54 model Gretsch. I forget what they call it. It's not a Streamliner, it's something else. So those are being made today. You can buy one of those, and it has the old D'Armond or the D'Armond type single coil pickups with the big magnets, and I guess that predated this by a couple of years. You know, the double coil or the humbucking pickup, I think that was like late 55, 56, when he was experimenting with that sort of a thing with Ray Butts. And so, you know, that's what, about 5 or 6 guitars in his early career that, well, 5 anyway, that were never really replicated or duplicated or reissued later on, you know, by Gibson or whoever, Martin. I always found that was interesting, you know, was, you know, Gretsch is everywhere. You can get any Gretsch model you can think of, just about. But nobody's really tried to replicate or reproduce or offer for sale, you know, a reproduced version of his early guitars. And I always thought that was kind of, you know, kind of an overlooked thing. You know, it seemed to be, well, focused mainly on Gretsch in the later years, and then Gibson later on, you know, with, when he went away from Gretsch and went to Gibson, they had several models, you know, an electric and a solid body steel string and a solid body nylon string. And but they never did reach back too much into the 40s era and reproduce any of those, except for one time. I've never seen it in person, but I know a fellow that has a reproduction L10, and I think it was made by Hutchins, you know, at the Gibson plant, and it had that extended treble fretboard, you know, like he has had from Les Paul. And I don't know how many of them they made, probably not that many. The only guy I ever saw with one is a fellow I know in Australia, of all places. He has one. So I do know that Gibson for a time reproduced that special L10, you know, that he had, I guess, inherited from Les Paul through his brother Jim, that had that extended fretboard on it. So I've just always been curious about the sound, you know, and to a degree, the different guitars he played back in the early days affected how he played over a few years' time. And I hadn't realized to what extent that it has affected, you know, how he played or how he sounded, until I started getting into this stuff myself and acquiring some of these older instruments and seeing how it affects my playing. You know, each guitar is a different feel, different neck, and, you know, little small differences. And you know, if you're playing by ear, then what's coming out of this box is going to affect to a degree what your hands do, you know, because you're trying to mold, or you're trying to make a sound, a certain sound. Maybe you have it in your head how you want it to sound. I'm sure he did. And, you know, and another thing is some approaches to these chords that I've kind of noticed he did in that era was different from, say, the Gretsch era. And that really became apparent when I acquired the Martin F1. And that guitar has a different neck than anything I've ever played in my life, you know, and that's just, I guess, the way it's shaped, the way it's made. But it is a different feel. And I think that played into a lot of his technique, you know, having different guitars over that 10-year period. He had different ideas would occur to him that he could do on different guitars and develop them into his style. And, you know, I think that's kind of been lost a little bit, you know, in the later years, is because nobody's really tried to go back and look at all that as a whole, you know, with instruments, you know, in hand, which that's be kind of hard to do unless you're just doing what I'm doing, is going out and finding them and building them or rebuilding them, you know, to try to recapture some of that. So that's kind of been my little aim in life for about the last 7 or 8 years, is trying to explore some of that early era in his career and understand it a little bit better. You know, those years really is what made him, you know, that sound is what made him, you know, famous later on. And so yeah, that's worth it's worth studying.